Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to an all-new NASA episode. So, Perseverance was just launched to Mars the other day. Okay. What else do we have going on in the old space arena? We've got a bunch of new chatter coming out talking about China's capabilities in space. Yet they're still trying to build the engines for the Raptors that they stole, but they can't do it because they don't have precision technology and know-how. It's funny when you steal all the outside stuff, but you can't steal the inside stuff. I forgot who it was, but they were relying on some, I think, European company to build the engines for them. And I think that maybe America went to them and said, don't be building them engines for our plane, because then you're a co-conspirator in the theft of the plane's design. But I listened to an interview a friend sent me, and the interview was all about whether or not America was going to get into a war with China. And it was I think it was on Brighteon. I just don't trust that platform. I think it's a deep state platform. And I know that they constantly preach that they're not, but then one doth protest too much sometimes. But the interview was very infomercial ShamWow. You know, some guy calling the other dude by the first name constantly, and then the entire interview was formulaically designed to be the psyop guy coming on there trying to gain credibility with how much he hates the government and then the things he's done, you know. And it was all just kind of dopey stories. It wasn't anything like you're a huge whistleblower, you haven't really affected change in the world. I don't know. Could be real. But again, when nothing profound is said, but everyone in the interview is acting like something profound, that's targeted at a much lower audience of just sort of like, man, did you hear that? But anyway, part of it was that supposedly, okay, and I'm going to qualify this as soon as I say this. Well, let me actually qualify it while I say it. Here you go. 1987, the United States of America deployed Star Wars into space, told the public that it was canceled, but it was completely perfected, and it's a multi-layer system. We have satellites up there that have missiles on them. We have satellites up there that have laser systems that rotate, that use the Van Allen belts for free energy. We have bombers that have missiles in them, that ICBMs that can just go up into the air, drop it out of the bay, boom. We have missiles that come out of missile silos. Why do the bombers versus the ground? I think it's because of detection reasons, whatever. This is 87 technology, so I don't think I'm knocking at any major technical briefs. I would never talk about anything that I may have learned in the recent years, right? But in this interview, it was as if in the 30 years of, you know, various presidents selling us out to our enemies, that they were able to master all this technology. Yeah, you might get a copy of one and fire it, and oh, see, we got that. And it's like, it's stole right out of our inventory, you know, so whatever. But it was that we could be attacked with an EMP missile. Hey, that could happen, you know. That all of our submarines are deterrents, right? Submarines were supposed to be, you know, in the ocean and incapable of detection. And so, you know, stealthing a submarine in the water is, you know, got all kinds of vectors of requirements. Boat to boat, you know, submarine to submarine, surface boat to submarine, satellite to submarine, aircraft to submarine, ground penetrating stuff to submarine. I mean, there's all kinds of different things that you could triangulate a submarine with. So if those are truly exposed to the enemy, which they said that and the previous administration, all that information was just flat out given to China. And so they're able to, and unless the current administration has been able to scramble all the codes and figure out ways of beating their own technology and going to the next level, we could be eternally exposed until we can develop new technology as a result of an acting president selling us, literally selling us. You give me personal money on the side, and I'll make sure that these workers from China can infiltrate our organizations and steal everything, which is why right now we have a big lockdown going on between our two countries. All right. But let's take some inventory too. And where is America? America is beautifully on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, meaning if you were to come here, we'd see you coming for days and weeks, right? Now, missile, depending on how fast it can go and how beautiful it is, I can get here pretty quickly. But split seconds are all the satellites in space need to literally splice and dice the incoming missiles into pieces before it's ever able to detonate. The Atlantic is a much shorter distance than the Pacific, of course, but then we're fairly good friends with our tyrannical neighbors, better known as Europe. And I want to state before we do this episode, just to give you a little Chotsky you can take with you. Because I said it in one of my last two episodes here. I've done a few out of order here. The most tyranny on planet Earth, the most pain and suffering, craziness on planet Earth has all happened in Europe. They still have the kings and queens, right? If you were to evolve away from tyranny, you would have no kings and queens anymore, but they still keep them and they still have complete immunity, legal immunity, right? If they're truly at your level, then they don't have legal immunity from any crime that they commit, but they do. So just keep that in the back of your head as you traverse life. America is the only place where Magna Carta has lasted over 200 years. But back to space. So NASA as an organization has been, I'd say, relatively quiet. We certainly haven't heard any more big announcements about going back to the moon in 4 years' time. I hate to remind you, but I said to you guys that they would say 2024 if they knew something was going to happen to make it not happen. They could blame. And then it was pushed out like 10 years. Then it was 2030, 6, and then it got pushed out another time. So, I mean, I don't know who to believe anymore. It's definitely not going to be taking place anytime soon. What else is going on in space? We have the comet that just went by. Whoop-de-doo. I've seen Halley's Comet and the Hale-Bopp Comet, and they're cool, but, whoop-de-doo, right? We have a network of, tens of thousands of satellites being launched by SpaceX to create a grid over Earth, and nobody thinks that's a bad idea. We have a huge, supposedly, and again, I know some of you are like, space doesn't exist. Hope the intro doesn't tick you off, or thank you for tolerating the intro. Half the intro is flat Earth, just so you know. Or a little segment is. In fact, for folks that don't believe that satellites are real, which I think is a tiny group of you, but I respect, your balls to say stuff like that in public. If you don't believe that they exist, then you're probably in for a horrible surprise in your future going, why am I on fire? Why is all this happening to my country? Why did all the electricity go out? Why is this? Why is that? And it's all because of upper atmosphere objects hovering up there. However they do, official word is they're in orbit, right? International Space Station, I haven't heard a lot about that either. Once the fuse was lit on exposing that object in space, and again, apparently there's an object in space that sort of matches the configuration. Maybe it's really there, as we know it on TV. But I mean, a space station that looks like an absolute dorm room of like a freshman, like I don't know how many guys are on there, 20 slobs up there. I mean, the place is a crap hole. It's totally unorganized. Whoever designed it, I mean, give me a break. Hair everywhere, big giant hairdos, all hair sprayed out to make it look like it's in zero G, people on invisible harnesses. We've been through all this. I mean, if you dig those kind of conversations, definitely go to deepthoughtsradio.com and click on NASA. I think there's 89 episodes with NASA content in it. But there's an ISS one up there. The only portal window in the whole space station faces Earth. Which you would want one to face Earth, but you would want one or two to go towards space, wouldn't you? If somebody were to say, let's just make this easy. You've got a little kid. He or she, doesn't matter. Both genders are totally into science and space. And they said, Mom, Dad, I'm going to design a space station. Okay, you go for it. We'll be right here when you get done. Don't you think they put an observatory on it or windows towards space? Wouldn't you think that they'd want to go get a really good shot of the moon? I mean, come on, you're up there. You're past a lot of the thicker atmosphere. Should be a clear shot. Nope. It's designed by apparently a group of monkeys that want you to review their version of Shakespeare they come up with. So, what's interesting about Perseverance? The rover going towards Mars right now, supposedly. Well, it's the biggest rover that we've ever put on Mars. That we will have put on Mars. I don't think we're on Mars, just so you know. If this is your first episode, I don't think we've ever been to Mars. Ever. As the Hollywood software like Terrigen gains capabilities and features, so too does the detail of the imagery that NASA brings back. Now, what NASA has done is a bunch of wild stuff. Plus, I mean, JPL. JPL is probably the image factory. They've shown us 4K images 20 years ago. But it wasn't 4K detail in the image, believe it or not. Today, they just announced, or yesterday, 4K images of Mars in general, right? And now it's all of a sudden looks a lot better. Did we just deliver brand new cameras up there? I mean, I don't know. Been up-resed. The more, my buddies have been using Terrigen for films, they just keep giving me calls and literally saying, dude, nothing is real. I mean, all that space stuff is completely fake. And I'm like, why do you say that all of a sudden so confidently? And some of these dudes have been to NASA at the deepest top secret level, right? And they said, look, I just created what I see on NASA's website. I just did it to see if I could do it. And it looks exactly the same. I'm like, damn, okay. Now again, SpaceX, aka NASA in cooperation, did a little video, I guess 2 months ago. I mentioned this in one of my last NASA episodes. I want to mention it again because it's going to coincide with how you're going to think about Perseverance landing on Mars. Now, again, one of the things that we have accepted because of science fiction movies, all the way back to was a Journey to the Moon, but definitely in Buck Rogers from the 1930s, and all the films up that aren't flying saucer-based spacecraft. Anytime you see an engine blowing fire in space, coming out of a cone, that is typically where we are indoctrinated into believing that that technique would work in space, in the vacuum of space. Now, I will tell you that there's no such thing as a true vacuum in the universe unless there is some massive anomaly with the subatomic particles that make up all things. If we had a vacuum, in space, a pure vacuum, you wouldn't be able to see any stars. There'd be no medium by which that energy could get to us. The ripples in the pond are the exact same thing that photons are. So there is no true vacuum in space. That's just a provable thing because you can see starlight. Even if, when you're in space, if you had vacuumless If you had a vacuum, let's just say, and no, I mean, I guess, they always say that, look, when you're in space, you can't see stars. That's BS because your eyeball has its own little atmosphere in it. And as soon as it hits the lens in your eyeball, it's going to refract and hit your rods and your cones, and it will create a depression due to sheer force, and you will start seeing what's up there. So the fact that NASA never has any stars in any of their photographs is a large indicator that they have a studio by which they cannot simulate the star pattern because it's too complex. You'd have to rotate it around as the stars rotate in space. The other thing is they know that there are anomalies in space that they cannot account for. So imagine they've got some crazy star projector or some blue screening technology that is going to try and simulate the stars in the underwater set that is the ISS, a lot of the ISS spacewalks, and a lot of those fake shots where the Earth is like this tiny little ball, and it, in real life, it'd be right on top of it because 250 miles up ain't nothing on a 8,000 mile around ball. Okay. But what if a little meteorite is being tracked by some students in Germany? Let's just say as an example. And they discovered that there's some anomaly coming in. Some meteorite just gets caught on a photograph. And then NASA's trying to fake it in the studio. And over there should be that little anomaly, but they're not feeding it live. They're using computer simulation of where they know stars to be in the sky and their various brightnesses and what have you. And what technology would you use? You can't use an LED screen. It's too specific to the shape of the screen versus where the camera's at. So you can't have any perspective on a movie screen. So the only thing you can really do would be to do some sort of blue screen technology, green screen technology. And the problem about blue screen and green screen is that you must light those surfaces in order to have those channels go into the camera to then be subtracted out. Well, lighting the background is going to light the rest of the stage. That's why it's difficult to do a night shot with blue screen as a part of the set without a lot of post-processing. And they want to do this stuff live so that kids can watch it and everything and feel like we're really there. And that's a problem. Same reason why no debris ever fell off the second Trade Center, because that was real-time CG. And you can't real-time CG, at least in 2001, a fuselage telescoping into a building and having debris fall on that side. Plus, what's going to be on the ground in real life, if you just did a CG shot up in the sky, you'd have to have stuff on the ground. If you watch it on TV, that stuff is falling out of the sky, but you go outside, nothing's falling out of the sky, you know that the TV is all simulated. Problem. The other thing that seems to just blow me away is that when you do see tours of the ISS, which some of them are horrible and some of them are very convincing, very Sandra Bullock, inside gravity. They're trying to show you what experiments they're doing up there. Like, why are we paying for this gigantic structure in space? Why are we paying for that? It's putting people in danger, potentially. Scientists with no gravity on their body lose bone density, and who knows what's going on in their system. Plus, getting there safely, bringing them home safely. A lot of us watched the Falcon 9 system deliver the astronauts in those goofy-ass spacesuits. I mean, those spacesuits were just like NASA's given up on even trying to try and convince the smart people that we're really there, because they know, I'm making this up, but I think that they know that most of us who are intelligent look at this going, that's a horrible impersonation of a spacesuit. And NASA's going back the other way. Yeah, but most people believe it. All right, you're right. You are right. People see what they want to believe in, right? The one thing that I bring up from time to time is that, and this is not my epiphany whatsoever, but it's one that The one that didn't hit me as hard when I first heard it, but now that I'm repeating it to people, it's sort of laughable and hilarious. And if you have evidence to the contrary, please get it to me somehow. But I have never seen personally, okay, any shots of them assembling the ISS, which quite frankly would be one of the most miraculous space labs in recorded history. Where is the footage of putting these modules together? And there's always this picture of the space station in space from above, which means the Earth is down below as the backdrop. The space shuttle, from what I can remember, every single time it's ever touched the space station before they canceled the program, it always approached from the bottom, never approached from the top. How could you possibly have the space shuttle above the space station and then somehow get it underneath the space station to do a dock? Doesn't make any sense. A good friend of mine always reminds me too, because he remembers watching the moon landing on TV. As he got older and had to, peel away from his previous beliefs, and, it's rough, man. It's rough when you have to let go. But he focuses on the fact that Hollywood was definitely hired to create a romantic setting for the Saturn V, to light it properly, to take photographs of it at night, to really romanticize it. So, because he's in Hollywood, an award-winning CG artist, okay, today he's like, yeah, I see it all now. I see the whole pipeline of all things at this point. But I saw this interview. I've mentioned it before in the last episode. They've admitted again, we never went to the moon for sure. And again, before I make this point, you would test these rovers on the moon, especially before you go there. Again, supposedly, right? You'd go up, you put a rover on the moon, and you would drive up to all the landing sites. It's much smaller than Mars, okay? Still huge. You just land it in the Sea of Tranquility where it's nice and smooth, far enough away from the other landing sites that you're not going to run into any peril. And just drive over to them and say hi. There they are. Because all you're going to see is the kickstand of the lunar lander and the American flag. And for 15, 16, 17, you would see a moon buggy. Okay. They don't even try because it's not there. That's why. But NASA had to admit that this Perseverance is the heaviest rover they can send to Mars because the atmosphere isn't thick enough to handle, with current booster technology, a heavier payload screaming down to the surface. So all those rockets that you see in the CG animations, right? I remember people posting the CG of landing a rover on Mars last time they did it as actual footage. Literally in the captions, this is actual footage. I was like, one, who would be taking a shot? Genius. And two, it's like in the corner, it'll say, animation, recreation, or whatever, simulates. Like, it's unbelievable, right? So that's the intellectual capacity of the individuals validating this fake situation. Now, I'm guessing that the Apollo lunar lander with two guys in it, plus a 700-pound, moon buggy in 15, 16, 17, having not increased the F1 booster, the Rocketdyne boosters, they didn't make them stronger. They didn't redesign the platform. When the first launch happened, the thing that they said on the news, and this is a bit of an exaggeration, but they're trying to make a point. They said you couldn't put a paperclip on that rocket without disturbing the chance of them getting to the moon because it was so perfectly balanced, right? And you hear this all the time that, boy, the first one is where they made all the mistakes. And then the second, so 12 through 17 minus 13, of course, got there. It's just like, dudes, where is the giant leap in technology? Why were Russia's boosters phenomenally more powerful than our F-1 boosters. Remember, 2.5 times more powerful than NASA's best booster in 1995 was the booster strength that Russia had achieved in 1972. And they said they couldn't get there mathematically. They did have a giant explosion. So, I mean, the Saturn V is an amazing rocket. Let's just not forget that. And these are amazing people that did what they did. But Gus Grissom was murdered, and his 2 partners murdered on the tarmac. I think the day before the Apollo 1 was supposed to do a launch, they gave them cyanide through their oxygen tubes, which is why their bodies are just sitting there, burned, right? You got a blast hatch right here. You couldn't get out, but you could at least get rid of a fire. And a fire requires oxygen, right? Do we all know basic chemistry? Fires need oxygen. Why do you throw a towel on a fire if you can't? Because you rob it of oxygen and the fire goes out. Okay, sounds good to me. It's pretty much my experience with life. So you got a cockpit full of oxygen. Now, obviously there's some sort of source, but these guys are also in spacesuits. So they're all closed up. They're their own little ecosystems, right? And they're sitting there, burned to death, having not moved. They're still seatbelted in. All I gotta do is hit the little release tab on their chest. Poof, it pops off. Someone grabs the TNT bolted door. Boom, that pops off. And at least they can stick their head out. Like someone in an apartment complex where their apartment's on fire. None of that took place. The official report is that their bodies had cyanide in them. This is the 11-inch report that was given to Gus Grissom's wife. All right. Do you ever hear about that? Keep your mouth shut, or we'll turn off your husband's pension that you're living off of. But so, Moon has no atmosphere of any measurable level. Now, technically speaking, I don't know what it would hold onto its surface. It's so crystal clear when we look at it through telescopes that that's really the indication that there's not much of any registrable atmosphere. So now you're screaming at the surface and you're firing your booster. What's the booster pushing off of? As admitted in this Perseverance launch plan, they can't send up anything heavier than the Perseverance. Otherwise, it'll crash into the surface. Well, what do you think? What do you think? Do you think the 10,000-pound thrust engine on the bottom of the lunar lander is more powerful than all the motors and boosters that are used on the Perseverance landing mechanism right now on the Mars project? Some 50 years later. What do you think? I'm going to give NASA credit that they have boosters right now. And I believe there's like 4, minimum of 4 they're going to fire when this thing starts screaming at Mars, right? And that's it. They've hit their maximum. Immediately invalidates the moon missions for a whole other boatload of reasons. And it also means that in space, firing an engine without an atmosphere, again, it's not a vacuum, but it's, in terms of a motor in space, it's a vacuum. You're not pushing off of anything. You can blow all the fire out of that little cone you want. It's not going to stop. It's not going to change course. You're going in that direction. And unless you can push off of something, not yourself, you're not going to do anything. You're going to have to create a whole new engine system to land on foreign bodies. And maybe they've got that technology too, some anti-gravity thing, which we've talked about several times. Let's go back to the satellite conversation as we bop around here. Current threats to America. All right. Well, I do think that there is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek process going on when it comes to America and, say, like Russia. Russia's the only one that's the real competitor. We're pretending not to like each other because one party in our country of America has literally taken the Cold War out of the mothball playbook and injected it into society again, such that we're now hating the Ruskies again. If you're Russian, you need to understand America loves you. Yeah, your president's a gangster. He's been through a lot in his lifetime to rescue the country country is prospering. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's probably the wild, wild west in a lot of areas over there. Hey, you're doing your thing. But we don't have to be involved with your country to like you. But we don't buy it. Maybe there's a World War III coming and it's all Russia against the United States. That'd be a shock to me. I think Europe messes with Russia more than America does, right? But they're even in, Germany's buying oil from Russia. That's what we should be doing. We should all be working together to have a good time, to enjoy the surface of the earth. China, don't know, man. They're really trying to throw down hardcore in so many different sectors. It's really kind of shocking, to be honest. They're getting into everyone's backyard. There's fights on the China-India border. They're picking a big fight in the Pacific Ocean against all those countries down there that are allied with the United States. They're messing with Taiwan again, trying to say that was their land to begin with. And it's like, oh my God, It proves you don't need a Bible or a Quran to hang on to ancient concepts of what is yours and what is theirs. You can just dial back and revise your history to go grab something on a full-blown atheist communistic level. You get the same horrible, acidic situation. But we do have a tremendous amount of space, literally speaking, between, say, China and the United States, the Pacific Ocean. And I guarantee you, if they're pushing satellites into space and pushing them over our country, I guarantee they're going to get wiped out really quickly. Even approaching the United States, they're going to get wiped out. This technology has advanced 30 plus years since we had the technology completely perfected to shoot anything out of space. We keep being told this thing, and I barely ever mention it, but we have tens of thousands of objects supposedly in space as space debris. But the ISS is just up there without any issue, never has any collision with anything, which is sort of laughable, right? Everything because you might think, well, maybe the particles are higher up. They have a bigger orbit. And you would probably be correct in a lot of those pieces and parts. But what happens to an orbit every single time? It deteriorates. A little bit. Every time it loops the Earth, it deteriorates. Even if it's in geocentric, it's still looping. It's just looping at the exact same speed as the Earth turning so that it's always over a target. Okay. All right. But imagine, you just take some of these weapons and you can't tell the public that this is occurring. But if there's supposedly a database. I've seen it several times. You guys have probably visited in your web browser, and it shows Earth and it shows all the space junk around Earth. It's all accounted for. Okay. Well, what if you just send up some of our weaponized satellites and we just start shooting them out of the sky? Just boom, 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 boom. Just start blowing everything up. And it accounts for some of the gigantic meteors we've seen over Russia, over, various rural areas where people have really clean shots, and most of it just burns up in the atmosphere. Apparently the one over Russia, landed in a lake, supposedly, but then again, I would probably not believe anything about that. But you can't tell everybody you're playing, was it Space Battle for television, whatever it was. A little cursor and just shooting everything out of the sky. But that's really what we should do, shouldn't we? Shoot things and vaporize them completely. Use directed energy weapons towards the space debris. So you have a big piece of aluminum. Well, you dial the energy weapon to resonate at aluminum, and you just hit that thing, and it's going to atomize into its subparticles. There you go. Turn it into thermal energy. Just vaporizes, right? Plus, you're testing your technology, making space a safer place, right? The other thing, too, is to always remember, because this Brighteon video was trying to really create some hysteria, that somehow a World War III is in the plans for the future. And I've covered this a couple times, and this is space-related conversation here, because I'm going to be talking about the space way of fighting the war, because it's a super, super sad thing that, and we've been here before. Remember when we didn't have boats that could cross the big oceans? We just had little side skimmers, little canoes, and tinier boats. Well, land was the place we fought the wars, and water was sort of a sovereign place. Kind of like a water buffalo running away from hyenas, right? It just jumps on the water, and the hyenas are freaked out about water, and so it gets to just chill until the herd finds it and then chases everybody else off. Okay. Or until they get bored and walk off. But once we started building, Ironsides and battleships and stuff, well, we started having war on the water. It was the new thing. So what was the safe zone then? The sky. The sky was a safe zone. Well, then we started building planes and hot air balloons, and then we immediately, just think about it. The Wright brothers flew technically in 1903. They didn't get the patent until 1907 because the patent office was trying to give the patent to the Navy, who was trying to create a plane. They could never do it. So one of the Wright brothers went to France during the World Fair, and he flew it over there. France was like, we're going to patent this for France in your name. And then America used the time difference, the 8-hour time difference, and patented it here before. Sneaky, crazy crap. But think about it. 1907, we have a plane. And then you get your Red Baron stuff in the latter part of World War I. By World War II, we're fighting specifically air battles, bombing runs over Germany and the Pacific Rim War against the Japanese. And the Japanese got the zero. And, it's just like, I guess it's exciting if morbid results are your thing, right? I mean, are wars God-based or Satan-based? You tell me, So now we had conquered all perceivable domains and turned them all into war zones, land, water, and sky. And now we're going into space. Why did Space Force get created? Because it's become a liability to sneak a bunch of military objectives into NASA JPL. Why do that? Why have a bunch of $500 toilet seats that then pay for a covert satellite when you can just finally say, look, everyone else is going into space. We were one of the first pioneers in space after Russia conquered all goals up there, supposedly. So we got to do it. We got to get up there to create a deterrent shield such that no matter what is launched against the United States, we can knock it out of the sky. But what's debuted in the last year from Russia? The hypersonic missiles. Now again, some special effects gurus around the world have picked apart the launch video of the hypersonic missile, which was just unbelievable. The video of it on YouTube shows a large missile utterly and completely disappearing out of sight so quickly. There's no frames for your brain to perceive it really doing much besides the smoke trail. But CG people went in and realized that they had been deleting frames and basically made it look a lot faster than it was. Now, maybe it's super fast, but how many times have we seen displays of military capability? Some of you might remember the first Moab drop, I believe, in the state of Florida. We showed the world what it did, and we invited news agencies to come see it, do this horrible daisy cutter thing in whatever wilderness area we dropped that bomb. I'm pretty sure that's where it was dropped. So if Vladimir Putin is going to be showing off a hypersonic missile, which is super fast, I don't even know what speeds they're talking about anymore. You'd invite the independent press, the Associate Press, the Reuters, maybe even the New York Times, popular science people, Scientific American people. You'd invite the world to see it, to be freaked out about your prowess. But when you launch stuff in secret, and then you submit the video, whatever. Maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't. The idea is that missile would be so fast that it could get to America before America could do anything about it. That was the big hype. And the truth of the matter is, maybe it could get to Europe before anyone would know about it. It could definitely get to China before China could respond. But with our technology deployed in 1987, it just will not be able to get to America. It can't. If you have as much as 5 seconds of travel, it's going to be obliterated on its journey. It will. It'll be shredded. And it'll fall into the Pacific Ocean. It'll fall into the Atlantic Ocean. And it's just not going to happen. Plus, what if you're China? You'd have to call Xi Jinping and go, hey, dude, I'm going to be flying a bunch of big missiles over your country. Don't worry. They're not headed towards you. But at any point in time, one of them can come right down on Beijing, on Shanghai. So how do you trust that sort of thing, right? So space is being turned into another war zone. It's going to be Gundam before you know it, man. And it's a bummer. Investing in another platform of war. But what can you do, man? We have a country with 1.5 billion people, roughly, that believes that communism is a way of living. Well, until that gets sort of sorted out, I think we have to keep doing this, unfortunately. I mean, it's one thing to be in Europe and, okay, so you're climbing back into tyranny. All right, at least we know how to do that. It'll definitely get to a point where it turns into what it used to be several hundred years ago. It'll take a while. But not many people in a first world country could handle being incarcerated in China and having your organs harvested simply because someone wants to buy them. And you're a dissident and you're not Chinese. So you're the first person, man. Falun Gong people go second. You're first. So, you know, we got to defend ourselves. We got to put up a deterrent. There's the old phrase, a war economy is a good economy. Yeah, whatever. You know, the problem with that theory is that so many industries are neglected. You know, World War II, you could say a war economy is a good economy. Maybe even in the 60s with the Vietnam War. Because what were the products that we bought? Well, the most expensive products you would buy would be defense products. It's not to say that they're not the most expensive products. With the B-1 and the B-2 bombers, they're very expensive. The Raptors, the 33s that are coming up here. All right. But we do have billions and billions of dollars being made with cell phones and computers and a lot of other technologies. So if you were to turn all of the other alternate industries off because you're fighting some war and everyone's turning their pantyhose and all their, you know, copper and all this other stuff for bullets, a lot of industries would tank and the world would suffer. It's not that easy anymore. But let's review the pipeline real quickly for newcomers, especially about how these Mars missions would work. So what actually technically takes place from a human perspective, independent human beings, what do we get to see as the sort of investors in this technology? Because it's all taxpayer dollars. We see a rocket launch off of a pad. Very impressive. We see a camera on that rocket for a short period of time. Seems to hug the Earth really, really fast. Then the camera turns off for the entire mission to Mars instead of being on. Okay, so out of sight, out of mind, no stars, no Milky Way ever revealed. Most SpaceX footage is of Earth. You know, it's got the booster in the back. No matter what rocket they launch, it's the same engine in the back. It's hilarious, right? But it's out of sight, out of mind at that point. And then what are we doing as human beings to tell ourselves that these things are actually real? We're waiting for what? Images. The landing sequence doesn't have any images. I mean, they even did a good job faking the landing on the Titan moon of Was it Saturn, right? It was that spinning camera showing the surface. And boy, they just forget these amazing accomplishments they claim, right? It just makes no sense. If you can get something to any body in space, in our solar system at least, then you should have a plan to keep the camera rolling. But that's a liability. So we're going to have CG art playing on our televisions as they are telling us that this thing is landing. So all they're doing, if you close your eyes and just let the Mars mission happen, and then someone in the room is like, okay, I will tell you to open your eyes when we see a real photograph, supposedly that they've claimed, from this mission. Well, you're going to feel pretty silly believing all the information coming at your ears up until the point they claim to have the first shot from Mars. So, these missions take years to prepare, right? They have created, and this is the ecosystem of the mission. And this would be, quite frankly, how you would make a massive multiplayer online game of the same exact information, which is the following. If you're going to say that you're landing on Mars, then you're going to need to have a detailed map of the surface of Mars. You have to have that first. You can't just land. Like the Viking stuff is hilarious, right? The unbelievably detailed, surface of Mars that they have generated all, probably out of a bunch of different composite photographs of Mars. And again, the first pictures of Mars with telescopes a long time ago don't look anything like the Mars we see today, like nothing, right? Of course, they blame that on bad optics, and it's sort of like, okay, those old pictures of Mars with like stripes all over them, like looks like they have belts around the whole thing, right? It's just crazy. Look like they had roads all over Mars. That was the articles, I believe, that came out back, when these pictures were published long, long time ago. But you have to have a theoretical map of your planet such that when you say rover landed here, rover landed there, rover landed, it makes physical sense, right? It's a flat surface, so you obviously didn't land in the big cavern rip they have down the center at the equator, because they would just crash, right? Just land and start tumbling down the hill. That'd be a lot of work for nothing. Now, with the moon, it was a lot easier because we can just look at the thing with the telescope. We can draw it in a college, in a high school, in a junior high, in a grade school. Just as long as Dad can get you the telescope, you can just spend a few days. If there was nothing written down, right? Give all the little surfaces names, and so you have the Sea of Tranquility. Cool. Now, Mars, if we were to make it a video game, like some, was it Will Wright game? He's the dude that made SimCity. Okay. For any of you who've ever played Dungeons and Dragons, it's the same exact scenario. If you're a good dungeon master, it's like World of Warcraft, quite frankly. What happens with World of Warcraft? They design a continent. This is what you do in D&D. They pick out all the regions, what monsters are in those regions, backstories behind every little cave and castle and whatever. And they know where the mountains are, where the plains are, where the oceans are, where the waters are, where the rivers are, what fish are in the various bodies of water, because there's quests to cook. And you got to get certain fish. And so you got to fly around this continent to get to that river that has that particular fish. Same thing with NASA, man. You have to determine the entire surface of Mars. It's all fictitious, but you do it so that you can have a roadmap to land rovers. Now, the interesting thing is again, they never, we'll see with this Perseverance, right? It should be able to do what I talked about with the other idea of sending the rovers to the moon. It should, the moon, you should drive straight up to all the landing sites and take pictures of the terrain that was reused several times in different missions, right? They create a new terrain about every third mission. They create a new terrain, and then they would use it twice. And they just rearrange rocks and stuff. But it's the same mountains in the background, same perspective, same distance from the mountains. I mean, if you overlay it in Photoshop, which they never perceived happening, especially at a consumer level, you see the identical nature of what they did, the fraudulent thing they sold you, which were the moon missions. But now Mars has some pretty amazing claims in terms of its terrain, right? It has pyramids, pyramid-like structures that are perhaps natural. Again, sedimentary rock is going to fall at a very algorithmic fall-off rate, but it looks like they have flat sides, which is kind of odd. But we know we have kind of mountains like that on Earth, especially at the end of a plateau. It typically will split off if it doesn't do the veiny thing all the way down. We've seen some fairly flat surfaces, but why not land safely by the pyramids? Whatever the ranges of perseverance. I mean, my God, what is it? Those first two rovers in the early 20th century, they're still going. They were only supposed to go 11 months a pop, and now what are they on? Almost 18 years of functionality, which makes no sense. They require solar panels to operate. Their theory of how they were cleaning off the solar panels, which was pretty cool, was to vibrate them, to shake them. Well, now that we have, since those two rovers were supposedly dropped off on Mars, we have solar panel farms nowadays on planet Earth. And you need to go look up the videos on YouTube. Just type in solar panel farm cleaning and look at the unbelievable process to clean off these panels. And if you listen carefully to the dialogue from the people that are narrating, they will tell you the percentage of drop-off of the electrical nature, because it's blocking sunlight, that these things will essentially lose all of their capability of generating the photoelectric effect and generating electricity. Shaking it wouldn't work. If shaking it would work, believe me, the big giant machine that cleans these things would not be used, okay? It's got suds and water and special careful brushes not to scratch the surface. I mean, it's a very detailed process. But according to NASA, you just flap your wings and hey, it's 100% again. Year after year after year after year. We're almost on 2 decades, man. So each one of these that never run into an anomaly, they never get stuck in the sand. I mean, what's funny is I live, 3.5 miles from the beach, and, I've seen every vehicle that is supposed to be able to traverse sand get stuck in the beach, like 10 feet out, 20 feet out, 100 feet out. They're vehicles that are made to be in the sand, and they'll still get stuck every once in a while. You mean to tell me those rovers have never gotten stuck? I've seen them drive, supposedly, with the footage we got back when I was still a believer, driving in sand. Plus, the other thing, too, is that there's this big delay between the joystick, supposedly a JPL, and the rover getting the command in Mars, and then it doing the maneuver and then sending back the data, pictures of where it went. And the hilarious thing is if you're in sand, and lots of you have been stuck in mud and sand, and you're an adult and you've driven these vehicles, you know quite well that as soon as you start feeling that lack of traction, you're screwed. And you can quickly reverse out and get out of that situation and go, hey man, we can't go that way. It's too muddy. It's too sandy. It's whatever. Now, again, beaches do have water, and I don't think Mars simulation has any fluid water in it, of course. So, but again, probably at least half of the beach stranded things that I have witnessed personally during the surf competitions, the extreme sports competitions, and the paintball competitions, people are getting stuck in dry sand. And they're right there on top of the vehicle, and they still get stuck. So if the rover started having a problem, they never communicate some AI coding that goes, if it senses it's losing traction, it backs up, it does something different. There's nothing. I haven't thought it through yet. Now, when I was in high school, Again, this is based off probably completely crap data. Okay. What I'm saying is probably not true. If it is true, it's probably a coincidence if anything else. But my teacher in high school, who was a uber genius, he told us that there were, mountains on the surface of Mars that are 15 miles high. Okay, that'd be kind of cool to look at, wouldn't it? Okay. Pyramids, big tall mountains, really cool things. I could understand if all the data was real from the reconnaissance satellites, that big gorge down the center of the equator, which has been now romanticized as a laser beam because somebody saw Star Trek Enterprise, where they had a beam that shot Florida. Oh, no, it's a remnant from a space battle. Okay, just whatever. Just keep making shit up. I mean, I don't know, man. It's almost like I feel like if they told us the truth, this is all fake, but isn't it cool? You get a bunch of the population, probably more than 51%, that goes, yeah, we love it, man. Keep going. It's just nice and entertaining. And they'd have to continue faking it, Perseverance is a big rover compared to the others. Biggest one they've ever sent. I don't know what its mileage is. I don't know what its range is, but I'm sure it's going to operate absolutely perfectly its whole life. Hell, if the other two went 17 to 18 years and they understand intimately the rover that they designed in the late 20th century and deployed in the early 21st century, this new one should be unbelievable, should be, double down on everything. The cameras better be 8K, solar panel issue, no problem. Getting stuck, no problem. Maybe because it's heavier, it's going to have an issue. Who knows? They never make any mistakes. Do you realize that? Because what would a mistake turn into? It would turn into a defunding exercise. It would turn into an evaluation exercise. I actually don't think any of that would happen, but it's a potential thing they don't want to risk. They're a perfect organization minus the 1998 metric to standard conversion story. But I guarantee you, before this rocket ever launched off the surface of the Earth, it's just my opinion, all the photographs that we're going to get for the first several months, if not years, have already been generated. Now, it could be live where, they're doing that joystick thing. And again, you do a joystick. And unlike 9/11, which needs to be live action stuff, right? The plane has to completely disappear into the building, which is a physical impossibility because we can't put debris on the ground and they can't calculate, all that technology. They just can't do it. Maybe they could pre-generate it, but then you don't have the stuff hitting the ground because it doesn't really exist. A big problem there. But if you've got, a 15-minute delay to Mars and then a 15-minute delay back, you're dealing 20, 30 minutes of rendering time with massive supercomputers. Okay, not a big problem. Every grain of sand accounted for. We're told that the quantum computers aren't stabilized enough to really be of any major assistance to current day technology. But what if it is? What if it actually is stabilized? What if somewhere in the bowels of NASA or the government, they've got a 100-qubit quantum computer fully stabilized, 0% error, or if there is an error, it's got a decimal so far away from the number that doesn't matter. And then you've got enough horsepower to generate terrain instantaneously. Like instantaneously, man. Photorealistic. Terrigen 4, which is in a product you can download on your computer today. Right now, while you're watching this video, if you're on a laptop or a desktop, you can go download Terrigen and play with it while I'm talking to you. It's fully accessible. All right. That's above ground technology, right? And again, I'll just tell the story very, very quickly for the newcomers. When I was interviewing some of the guys that worked on the movie Tron in 1982, a balcony in San Diego, I asked two of them, I said, well, what did you guys work on after Tron? Because, we had Last Starfighter and a bunch of other technology. Maybe worked for Digital Domain and helped out Cameron. Nope, they went to go work for JPL for 13 years creating train simulation software. I said, well, how good was it? They said, well, depending on how much memory you have in the computer, every grain of sand, man, no problem. Well, they worked there during the first rover in 93, the little tiny one that just drove around really quickly and then ended. Not that they needed that software to generate the fake pictures we saw. I mean, they're real pictures. It's just not Mars. Now, the question I seldom touch on, which I want to touch on for this episode, is, are they really creating any usable technology for if this were to ever become possible? And I'd say, oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. You can't keep everybody in the dark, and you don't disclose this. And the other thing too is that, there's a big perception that everyone's in on it, and that's absolutely not the case. There's plenty of people who probably are, but, overall amount of employees, I mean, who knows? I don't know how much GPL NASA employ. I'm sure it's over 100,000 employees. You're talking about almost every single person being convinced this is real, really building the rovers, really building the rockets and the satellites and the enclosures and all that good stuff, writing the software, testing stuff out. Theoretically, it makes sense on paper if you believe all of the physics of what they're saying. And again, what if it turns out that the truth of the matter is we can't land on the moon until we come up with an ethereal antimatter, or no, it doesn't have to be antimatter, but an ethereal anti-gravity engine that talks to the universe instead of talking to atmospheres, okay? It talks to the atmosphere of the fabric of space, and it can just go up there and land like a UFO, just boom. Until we get that technology, because there's no atmosphere on the moon, there's just no way to land anything on the moon without crashing really hard. You'd have to do the balloon technique. But then again, if you're going anywhere from 17 to 30,000 miles an hour, I don't know what can survive that situation. What if it hit a rock? A big, big rock sticking out of the ground 20, 30 feet at that speed, it would just be pate. But because Mars might have an atmosphere like Earth, we actually can land stuff on Mars because we have a technique of using our current conventional engines that we use here on Earth, which provide the lift for everything you've ever seen take off from a launch pad. Now, there is one dude out there that we all have sort of this question about. Because if I said to you, name the guy that runs NASA, some of you might know the president of NASA. If I said, name the guy, and it could be a girl too, I guess, I don't even know, who runs GPL, you probably don't know. I don't know. But who's the space guy on planet Earth right now? The de facto space guy. It's Elon Musk. Well, Elon Musk smoked a joint on Joe Rogan's show. Bill Clinton played a saxophone on Arsenio Hall. Neil deGrasse Tyson was in Zoolander 2 and The Big Bang. Bill Nye the douchebag guy, well, where has he not infected society with his capitulation? They make heroes out of people so that you just believe everything that they say. And we have had heroes like Carl Sagan, who may or may not have been correct about what he said, but you don't get the sense his goal was out there trying to disinfo the world. He probably just read books really efficiently and made great videos where he might have been wrong. But he was pitching the current theories of the day. But the big question is, we're almost 100%, okay, certain that a lot of what SpaceX does is equal BS, besides low orbit things. We know they're lying about some things because we see launches from California going over the Pacific Ocean towards China, telling us that it's going to resupply the space station in space, which is going the other direction. There's no methodology to turn around a rocket that I'm aware of and go supersonic the other direction. Those are most likely spy satellites or something completely different, or just something for show. The SpaceX launches are nauseating Hollywood television production. It's in fact, even television's better today than Hollywood in a lot of cases, but it would be almost like 80s television where it's lower budgets and less convincing. You know, if you were to watch Buck Rogers in the late 70s along with Battlestar Galactica, you knew it was fake. You know, when you watch Star Wars in 78, 80, and 83, well, you got some massive, Richard Edlund level effects going on. So you could maybe convince yourself that stuff's real, right? At least they weathered the ships in some cases, right? So our big question is, does this guy know that everything's fake? And I think the answer is yes. He makes a lot of jokes about CG. But what is sort of SpaceX's entire portfolio of things that might be real and might be fake, right? Well, he put a roadster, I keep saying the wrong thing. I said it wrong in my Space XYZ PDQ thing or whatever. The Roadster, the first Tesla Roadster. He put one in the Falcon 9 and supposedly launched it into orbit. Or I guess he threw it into space is sort of the idea. You have tires that didn't explode. You had plastic that didn't melt or freeze. You didn't have any torquing of temperature, which it's a tumultuous environment up there, right? Any of you have seen your dashboard split as a result of heat and fatigue. You're talking about anything in the light was about 250 Fahrenheit, probably a little higher, and anything in the shadow was 250 below Fahrenheit. So you're talking about just ripping this car to shreds the second that the canopy opens. Nope, no problem. Tires didn't explode. I mean, it just would have been really cool had they just let the car explode in space. It would have been really cool. Oh, wow, that really is in space. But no, they repurposed the ISS technique of making a space station look like it's in space as they're creating fake footage. And just most of the world swallowed it. I know a lot of people in special effects that don't even think twice about it. But it's funny to have a bunch of friends in special effects that believe everything NASA says, and that a bunch of them, on their own, they're not coming to me to break their seal. They're finding out on their own with just looking at the data, and they're coming back proving to me that this stuff is fake. In some cases where effects are really easy to see. A lot of North Korean rocket launches, for instance, were just atrocious junior level CG. I mean, hats off to that guy for trying. We know that, I can't remember whether or not it was North Korea or China, but I believe, I know one of them actually used footage from Top Gun, the movie, from the mid-'80s and broadcast it to their people and said, this is our Air Force kicking ass and taking names. It's a bunch of American planes with American insignias and white dudes flying the plane, and they're trying to tell their Asian population that that's our dudes. It's just like, doesn't make any sense. And Top Gun is like one of the most popular movies from the 80s. It's like, you might want to borrow from like a bomb movie that at least had decent, fighter pilot scenes, But what's a SpaceX launch? Well, they put all these hipsters in a room and they have like an applause scream sign, and they just butter the whole thing up, don't they? Heavily orchestrated scripts. Always that, because, so let's keep going on the platform. Excuse me. We got the Roadster in space that didn't explode, totally fake. We've got his rockets that launch, and supposedly the boosters come back down and land on a pad. But to my knowledge, well, I don't know a single soul that's a real human being that's ever seen that actually occur with their own eyes. Again, if it's the most phenomenal thing that's ever existed, you would be taking tons of shots of this thing with thousands of people watching. I watched the space shuttle take off with hundreds of thousands of people in 1983 with Sally Ride's maiden voyage. It was 83. And then I watched a space shuttle land in the California desert with 850,000 people in the desert. So I've seen it take off and I've seen it land. Okay. I can say that thing goes into space and the thing lands and it comes in at Mach. It's just busting the sound barrier like crazy as it comes in. All right. So why can't I get a ticket to go see these boosters land and film it with my iPhone? Live stream it right onto YouTube or Facebook or whatever. Probably because it doesn't really happen. And of course, they've now pushed it on a ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, right? But the theory is that, okay, it's already going that direction. Why don't we just pick it up in the ocean? You know, the amount of mathematics that would need to occur is insane. And every single time the thing's about to land, the camera cuts because they're switching to a different feed or they're laying it down with a crane or whatever fake crap they're doing. So it's insulting our intelligence. And again, it's funny because a lot of you chimed in when I mentioned this, and I have to thank each and every one of you. It appears that some of you are at least very informed about structural engineering, because what I was talking about is when one of these rockets launches, okay, and again, they're picking up welders off the street. They're picking people off the street that have never welded in their life and teaching them welding, because I know one, and they become welders for SpaceX. So we're not talking about the best welders in the world, at least in part. When these fuselages get launched, the amount of metric tons of pressure from the engine compartment up is insane. Microfractures in the steel would deem these things completely useless. Completely useless. And they're not the most expensive part of the journey. What do you think's more expensive, the rocket or the rover? And taking care of the rover once it lands. The expense is all on the back end, not the front end. Who cares? Okay, so it's a casualty of the budget, the fuselage or whatever the hell you call the rocket body itself. It falls into the ocean, right? I'm not shedding any tears. I've never heard anyone say, because they did this with the space shuttle, right? Those boosters come off and then fall in the ocean. They can go grab them out. I've never heard anyone say, well, I would pay for this space program, but I don't want to be paying for rockets every single time. These things better be reusable. Said no one ever, right? And I think right before NASA, within a couple of years of SpaceX supposedly landing something backwards, NASA had just failed again. You know, like 40 years of trying, they just could not get any rocket to go up and then land back down comfortably. And SpaceX is like, well, CG, we never make a mistake. Now, again, to get anyone to go along with this whole thing, there's some basic ecosystems and offerings that could get someone to do it. With an average employee at a high level of clearance in NASA, it is probably straight up the paycheck. Second thing would be you're going to be revered for something that isn't happening, but who cares? You have a choice of not being revered because nothing's happening or being revered for something that they think is happening. Which one do you want, right? How many people over the years of rock and roll music especially have just wanted the fame of being a rock star, but don't really want to have to write music every single year. They don't really want to have to tour because it's a grueling process. They just want the fame. They just want to walk into some place and all of a sudden the tables get clear, the meal's free, the chicks jump on you, whatever, guys jump on you, whatever you want. a bunch of these kids just want the fame. And so maybe there's some guys in NASA. And you know what? They could probably pre-qualify individuals to see if they will go for it. Get them into some other deceptive things to see if they're willing to go for it. Are you a slimy bastard? Oh, he is. He's totally. What level is slimy bastard? He's like an 8.5. But I think we can get him to a 9 or 10 as soon as we get him involved because he's going to eat this up. Okay, great. Poof. We revere the astronauts like gods sometimes, right? Some groups do. And we've had some pretty mortal people with some pretty questionable ethics and judgment. What was the woman in Florida that her boyfriend was one of the astronauts that went up while he was up in low orbit, supposedly, must have been. She went to a bar to go and kill or beat up severely, I think it was to kill, a woman in the bar that was supposedly sleeping with that guy behind their back. And so she was going to level the playing field while he was in space. Yeah, that's some really good judgment there and good ethics, right? So when you talk about whether or not astronauts will go along with it, they're human. You know? How many people do we see in this world right now that are trying to use the crises that we have today to seem superior, but they just showed up to the conversation like 5 minutes ago about what's really going on in the world, who's who, who's in charge, what's going on. I have no idea about the dark crap that's going on. But they're experts all of a sudden. Research nothing, know everything. No, there's plenty of those people that will gladly pretend to be astronauts. And they're not stupid. In fact, they might actually be the complete antithesis of stupid. How many brilliant people are responsible for wars? Is Henry Kissinger stupid? No. Is Dick Cheney stupid? Donald Rumsfeld? Zygmunt Brzezinski? Were they stupid? Hell no. Quite the opposite, which is why they get hired to do the job, man. Now, I want to come away from the outer space stuff and get back to the satellites for 1 second. There is the video I saw in Brighteon mentioned sort of an attack sequence that I guess is on the table now with technology that is disclosed, which is a neutron bomb and an EMP bomb. The neutron bomb, I guess, has been tested and detonated at some point, such that they believe that the big countries have it, including China, most likely due to intellectual theft. But the idea is that it kills all living matter and leaves everything else behind. So you just pop it over a major city, and within a few months, everyone's dead of something, if not immediately, depending on the radius proximity. It would be an airburst situation. You wouldn't want to break everything down below. And then all these people are dead. And then supposedly the theory is that they can invade that particular area. So they're supposedly able to come completely across the Pacific Ocean undetected with just legions of soldiers. Okay. And then this missile comes in, poof, and then, all the people are dead. Now you take Los Angeles, right? I hope that your just instant instincts dismiss the likelihood of that ever being possible. Maybe if the entire world attacked the United States, that's possible. But you'd have to have Russia in on it. And Russia knows they would be the next target. So I don't think they're ever going to go along with that. No matter how many backdoor handshakes and promises to the contrary, they'd be next. Okay? The other one is the EMP. And the EMP doesn't need to be a ballistic missile, but the electromagnetic pulse bomb obviously puts out a massive, massive frequency that would vibrate all pieces of metal that were small, such that they would thermalize, vaporize. That means that everything that's making this show occur right now would disappear, would turn into fire. The bulbs that are lighting me would go out. And they would be destroyed forever. you would have to manufacture brand new components to get anything to turn back on again. But the thread on Brighteon was, again, sort of like one of these coast-to-coast AM interviews where they're putting together absolutely implausible scenarios to freak you out, because that creates views. And that's how the Brighteon platform works, by the way. There's freedom of speech as long as you can be popular with your initial truths, right? It's so stupid. But there's a much easier way to pull off an EMP situation in Los Angeles and probably any city in the United States of America. And that is the shipping docks. Now, a lot of you know this already, and some of you have never heard this before. So maybe this is interesting to you. If any of you have seen any of the videos where you have this unbelievable, inconceivable amount of shipping containers that come over from these boats. I used to know a guy who unloaded them from the cranes in Long Beach. He used to smoke cigars down the street with me. They don't check even the majority of these containers to see if they have something volatile in them. People, children, women, because you could put a whole camp in there, right? You could put food in there and everything in there. You'd be a little apartment complex in there. They could definitely survive the journey. They could have drugs. They could have all kinds of stuff. So they only spot check these containers, and it's a tiny fraction of the amount that are allowed into the country. Now I don't know if they use these at the ports, but I know that the Canadian border has sensors for atomic half-life emissions. And it's so unbelievably accurate that a woman who was on chemotherapy drove through on this television show they have about border control, and she set off the alarms. And then I believe it was because she had chemo in her system, and it was just setting off the alarms, the emission from the chemo. Which should tell you how wonderful chemotherapy is. So a nuclear payload, well, that would have to be massively, massively shielded. And I mean, the amount of shielding that it would require would probably bust the cap of the overall allowed weight of that particular container, thus that the cranes couldn't hang on to it, you couldn't lift it up, and you couldn't put it on a flatbed truck without having the extra wide payload, dually tires everywhere, right? But an EMP device, I don't believe would have to have anything that would immediately show up on any one of these scans. Now, I'm hoping the customs and security have a lot of secret techniques for vetting these containers that are not publicized, such that every container does get vetted for specifics of which I'm talking about. But if you think about an EMP system, which is not something that we're able to see with our own eyes. There was a fictional one inside of the movie Matrix. It's been in several movies, but they never really show you what it is. And if they do, it's just some CG thing, right? No basis on reality. But you would imagine it would be some electronic device that is going to be able to generate a tremendous amount of electricity and then disperse it. So maybe you have one container with a gigantic one. You take it to a special facility to charge it up, and you got so many minutes to get it down the street. You just drive it down Wilshire Boulevard, the 101 that goes right through Los Angeles downtown, and you pop it. And then a bunch of stuff gets fried. If you're able to get one in the country, then you might not rely on there being just one. If you're going to be China, and as much as I'm not a big fan of the CCP, I don't want to accuse them of things they're not doing. This is just a scenario. And maybe bring in 10 on 10 different ships. You put some brand on the outside that has been going into the docks for years. And so the inspectors just skip it because it's like, oh, that's just cigarettes or whatever. little rubber toys or whatever. So you hedge your bet. You drive them all over Los Angeles, which is a very big place. It's not like most cities that are really condensed. I mean, it's a lot of miles, man. It's about 35 miles square. So even if it's preferred to drop it from space, you could do a lot of damage. Imagine one in the center of New York, one in the center of San Francisco. They all have, cargo shipping close by. Doesn't even matter if you can get it in Georgia. You could just drive the thing straight up. As long as you didn't get caught, well, you just got a portable bomb on your hands, right? Think about how much damage one of those could do in, say, New York City. In New York City alone, what would be the budget of all of the electronics destroyed in a split second? It was, say, Manhattan or something. $1 trillion? How much damage could it do? Every single electronic device, besides maybe some big tube radios somewhere here and there, that hasn't been retrofitted with new components as a repair, just gone in a split second. How many years would it take to repair a city from something like that? How many years? A decade? Before it is even nominally functional again? How many years did it take to build New York City? All that's going to have to be repaired. Chaos is something I don't think that the controls of the world really dig as much as we think they do. They create problem reaction solutions everywhere, but it's always a very confined space, right? Less damage is possible with the most change is possible. The whole virus thing we have in 2020 is really a freebie, right? People call people to freak people out. Oh, this invisible boogeyman's in town. It's a real thing. But to the degree it's been sensationalized, it's not that big. But it stopped the world. Phone call stopped the world. Let's take all those other theaters of war besides space. Now let's think this thing through for a split second. Could you have a conventional army rolling across your country soil and you not know about it until the last second? No, probably can't. Too many people's cell phones to just make that phone call. Hey, look at this, bing, and they're just videotaping. There's a whole army of Russians going through Kansas, right? You'd know. Okay. Can anyone cross the oceans without us knowing with a big invading force? Absolutely not. They're 24-hour satellite, 24-hour radar, 24-hour naval fleets. It's impossible to not know. Could someone bring something through the sky and you not know about it? No way. Air traffic control would pick it up. You realize every single plane that's in the sky is sending out radar signals to figure out what it's next to so it can tell the pilots, and then that's all related to the ground outside of ground-based radar. It's impossible unless somehow you could jam everything, but then you'd have this big void coming at you, right? You would know that's probably full of a big, formidable force. It takes a long time to fly from China to the United States with people, and that's flying. It's 550 miles an hour. It still takes you, 14 hours to get to Hong Kong, right? Okay. Now let's go to space. Could a bunch of satellites be moved into place and punch the Earth and us not know about it? Because that's the fear. I would say there's two sides to this answer. And my estimations of technology that I've been privy to know about and stuff I've researched myself. The answer be no and yes. No, that we wouldn't be able to see it coming at us. And again, with all that arsenal up there I told you about, it's 33 years old. I'm sure it's gotten a lot better since then, and I think that we would be protected in a first world capacity. But if any of you have ever seen, death by 1,000 needles theories, you know that there could be potentially an onslaught of things that if any of you played a video game where you just get absolutely overwhelmed by enemies, well, sometimes they could rush in so quick, you're getting most of them, but all you need is a couple to land, and you got a big problem on your hands. What was the big missile shield issue in Israel? And then it was redone on the border of Russia, which was that we were putting in a missile defense system that was 3 layers deep, meaning as rockets were coming over from Russia, we had 3 different techniques to knock it out of the sky. And Vladimir Putin did an actual press conference on this, saying that they were aware of this technology being put on his border. I think it was in the Ukraine. And he was very close to debuting new technology that could punch through that. And that has since come and passed. And he claims to have that technology. And I guarantee you, it's just a matter of overwhelming the system. What I'm trying to tell you is the gist is those numbers aren't very good for any attacking force. And I would think unless you were the worst statistician, you wouldn't use strategery of that kind. It's too likely to expose your hand. It's too likely to make you lose and thus deem yourself the enemy of the state, of the world, and that you're being very aggressive and you're starting a world war potentially. And then everyone will get freaked out, demand that their armies be used against you. And so, even though China's definitely favorably viewed by Europe because Europe's trying to use China's money to bail themselves out of their EU bankruptcy, they still would crush China because they don't want that. They know once you spread one place, you're going to spread other places, and they just don't want that kind of instability in the world. So no one can really win that war. It's the old war games theory. So I think we're okay. Now, I've heard conspiracy theories as I finish up here. And this is really like a double-decker cake of conspiracy, which is that the elite of the world want to leave Earth. And so all the Mars missions are based on figuring out how to make that possible for them. I seem to remember Elon Musk saying at least a few times that he was going to be on Mars personally, and that he would willingly die on Mars to be one of the first explorers over there in 2018. Okay. So again, what's interesting about every product that Elon Musk puts out, he really knows how to play up the hype game, because the hype game is a very interesting game. It would be, the way it works is that you say a bunch of hype things that everybody thinks is the coolest thing on planet Earth. And because he does deliver good products, he's sort of the virgin of electric cars. He's done some incredible battery development, even though his latest battery factory is now obsolete for a new design. I haven't heard any updates on that, whether or not he's got a better patent in there. He's a progressive dude. We kind of like his attitude. I haven't seen him say or do anything that makes me dislike the guy whatsoever. But he knows that no one ever holds anyone accountable for this stuff. For those of you who frequented the old magazine Omni way back in the 80s, especially, they ran contests to orbit the moon. They ran contests on landing on the moon. And none of that ever occurred. The Russians have sold tickets to orbit the moon. None of those missions have ever happened. But that's like 20-year-old claims. Some of them 35-year-old claims. Never happens. And no one ever seems to remember. It's almost as if you bought some organ enlargement pill off the internet, and then you took it and nothing happened. And you feel so utterly embarrassed that you fell for the scam that you don't want anyone to know you parted with the money. Think about the prospect of conquering a brand new planet. For those of you who remember the original Total Recall from 1988, I think it was somewhere in there, they ran a scenario in that movie of having turned Mars into a mining colony run by this one guy who was the dude from RoboCop. Incredible actor. He plays the best bad guys on planet Earth. They had turned it into a slave community, right? It was the earliest settlers that happened way before the movie took place had mutated due to bad shielding from the sun. And so they had all kinds of wild psychic powers and that kind of stuff. But erase that particular sci-fi element to the story. Well, if you flew to Mars to be an indentured servant to some mining colony or some construction company or something, then you are now in the wild, wild west. And there's a lot of X-1 episodes about this very thing. You're not protected anymore. Anything can happen there. Who are you going to call? They're totally and utterly in control. Well, Agenda 21 is all about resetting the Earth to establish 100% control back into the hands of those who perceive themselves as the rulers of the world. Sadly, we have seen in 2020, they have a tremendous amount of supporters in the freest country on the planet, right? It's really sad how gullible and ignorant people are. And I wanted to pass this into this episode. I could probably do a whole episode about this, but maybe this is a preview. Imagine that you wanted to pull a scam on society. Pick whatever scam you want. But what the scam requires is a bunch of uninformed citizens of the planet to go along with your scam to force those who are informed to comply because they're simply being overwhelmed by complicity. You have an educational system which records all of the IQs of the people graduating from K through 12. You definitely have a list of all the degrees that have been awarded in all the major universities. You can even track someone's life. We don't have this capability, but they have this capability of trying to track, okay, this person graduated high school with this particular GPA. Then they went to college and they got this particular GPA. And even though they passed, let's look at their overall salary and success. You could even track asset purchasing and everything. Mobility, do they go on vacations? We can find out just how dumb a particular region of the world is. And the more sophisticated and first world country it is, the better and easier it is to track that information. All right. So they do the algorithm in a computer, perhaps a big machine learning computer, perhaps a quantum computer, and they find out that once the average IQ sinks to a particular overall bell curve, even though there's smart people at the higher levels, there's not that many. And they realize that the simulation is now coming back with the data that they want. They get complicity. They maybe do some little focus groups. What if this happened? What would you do? What if someone told you to wear a mask? Would you do it? Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely. Okay. What's interesting about what we're dealing with at this particular year is that the amount of microbiology you need to understand in order to understand whether or not you're in harm's way is quite a bit for the average person. When you factor in pre-existing conditions with a particular virus, it compounds even further to understand whether or not you're at risk. As the data gets muddied up because everyone being checked into a hospital is marked a COVID patient or an ICU, well, now you're going to have a bunch of data that's being folded into the system that is incorrect. Cause and effect models that actually aren't related to each other. But if we don't clean out the medical industry from all this bad data that was acquired during this scam, then, which is an over-exaggerated version of reality, right? Reality does have deaths, and this virus does cause deaths. Don't get me wrong. But saying a kid who broke his arm in Orange County right now, okay, you break your arm and you go into an ICU, intensive care unit. They mark you down as a COVID patient. This is straight from people who do it, okay, to me, not through somebody else, but to me personally. They mark you down as a COVID patient. The policy is that checkbox on your diagnosis can be altered after 36 hours. So let's think about this. Your kid was messing around, broke their arm. As a parent, if it's your first child to break an arm, whether you have multiple children or not, you're freaked out, man. You go to the ICU, they straighten your kid's arm, they set the bone, they put a cast on it. All this paperwork's being filed in the background. All you want is your child to be repaired, to stop crying, to start letting everyone sort of deal with the Kubler-Ross phases of your kid being injured. You want to be at home with that child, watching TV, give them some ice cream, whatever it is, to calm the whole situation down. Are you going to go back a day and a half later to say, oh, you know that checkbox you checked? I want to uncheck that. No. So these hospitals are fraudulently marking people as COVID patients so they can steal the money from the government. Hopefully there's an investigation in that at some point where someone looks at the diagnosis and goes, okay, for every dime that you steal from the government, we're going to charge you $10. So think it through. But all these cases that have already gone through where it was not classified properly, we're just going to ding your hospital to the point where probably the hospital goes bankrupt and has to switch owners to be opened again. And then that hospital is going to have a stigma for the rest of its life as being a fraudulent organization. All the hospital administrators will be fired. Any of the nurses and doctors will be prosecuted for falsifying medical data, maybe kicked out of the industry for the rest of their lives, with perhaps the opportunity for individual testimonies for people to say, well, my boss, who's the doctor, made me do this. The hospital administrator made me do this. But again, if I told you to go rob a bank and you did, am I going to get prosecuted? Only if I'm Charles Manson. The rest of it is you just being dumb and following bad advice. I could say I was joking. Part of the reason I'm mentioning that is to underline and underscore the fabric of society that would feed all these space programs, that feeds the believability of the space programs and feeds those who perpetrate the deception to us. That's why I know a lot of you are working overtime with your friends and family. That's the best group to work through. Social media is not the best to work through. You don't have much credibility with people you've never met face to face. You potentially have a tremendous amount of credibility with your family members, especially if you've kept a good record and you're not a boy who calls wolf and you're not a person who's got a criminal background. Which is why disinformation is very dangerous, because if you present disinformation as true fact and it comes out that you were posting something incorrectly, then you'll whittle down anyone's ability to listen to you, which is a bummer, because if you tend to get the information right at some future point and you're, 99 pieces of information out of 100 is correct, you may not have anyone to listen to you. Unless you're very, very strategic with the way that you communicate with your family. Go, look, I'm really sorry. I didn't have my pipeline down to evaluate information, but let me show you this. I'm going to show you where I looked up things and made sure things were right or wrong. The reason why all of this space deception can continue forever is because we're not fixing society at its base form. Isn't it interesting that we at least have a tremendous amount of people questioning the medical data that we're getting in 2020, but almost no one questioning space data? Because people want to believe. And part of that, you can understand 100%. You can sympathize with people's desires to believe things. But if it results in a reaction solution that is going to end up removing freedom and sovereignty, the same thing, then we failed. As I said a long time ago in the first year of the show, and those hardcore listeners have heard this 100 times, I apologize for the repetition. But for the newcomers, this show is aimed at giving you personal power at every level, from being creative. Again, the first season's on a different channel. because they were all remastered. So definitely go to deepthoughtsradio.com and click on the season 1 channel. But it's to help you with everything from those deep psychological issues that you're going to deal with by yourself when no one else is around, which is the first sort of empowerment that needs to occur, in my opinion. We're trying to, well, put this way, if you were a structure, okay, what this show is trying to do is add more beams in there where you need them to make you stronger, to make you more resilient, to give you a clear path at things that you thought perhaps impossible, because no one ever told you that it's not special people who do things. It's people who do things. And guess what? You're a person, so you can do anything that you're capable of doing. Now, if you're a 5'1" woman, you probably can't walk out on a NFL playground or a playground in a field and play professional football. But there's something that you can do at 5'1" as a female that those guys out there on the field can't do. So we're equal in different ways, right? I don't like seeing people get deep into their lives with a regretful view of their past. The past is the past, man. You can never change it, right? A lot of the politics going on right now, especially in that movement with the letter Q in it, is a lot of trying to go backwards and fix the past. There's a lot of that needs to occur on a legislation level, but it could be perceived as a value if it fixes the now, and then thus preserves the future at the corrected version of now that we have, right? It's interesting how in my entire life, okay, I've been obsessed with space travel since I knew that any space travel had occurred. I mean, I thought I used to stare at the Viking pictures and the moon pictures and the space shuttle. I used to have a shuttle cutaway illustration on my wall that a lot of you had probably if you're around my age, 50 years old. But what's fascinating about it is that in average conversation, my entire life, unless I'm talking to a bunch of geeky guys like me, no one even mentions without disasters, okay, to push it into the consciousness of man, but they don't really mention space shuttle missions when they were occurring. No one really talks about the ISS even being there. No one ever talks about the Mars missions. It's like a little article here and there, but no one ever pays attention. But when you start totaling up the budgets of these programs, you're talking about tens of hundreds of billions of dollars. I hope that as a result of any type of program whatsoever, that the technology we're inventing is going to good use. But by the time it gets propagated up, if there's any true creation within those institutions, because I always envision black ops stuff being where the state-of-the-art stuff happens that we're not allowed to know about until it's, in our toaster later on, right? But this is an area of great interest for the listeners of Deep Thoughts Radio, which I love. But you tell me, have you in your lifetime been in a mall food court and you just hear the conversation next to you going, oh my God, did you hear the new rovers on Mars and blah, blah, did you see this? Did you see it? Maybe with the internet, it's a little bit more active, but I just don't hear that. I just don't. What I hear is what we're talking about in this show, which is, do you think we really did that? It's always a question of whether or not it's real. But I will tell you, other than freshly graduated aerospace kids, okay, who've been sold a big bill of goods, right? The adults who have had a chance to really think things through, they just shake their heads and they go, I can't even believe this scam's going on, and no one seems to realize it. But so here's your other episode question, which is, what area of space programs have I missed that I need to talk about? It could be a very specific area. One thing on my list that I have not done a video on yet, because I think it's going to be a bore fest, is the internal computer rope memory related of the lunar lander and how they created it. And, it was like this. If you guys have not seen the videos on rope memory and you know the anatomy of a computer fairly well, it's a mind-blowing concept that they created that functionally does work. I mean, I've seen people use these devices today. I don't believe it validates anything about the moon missions whatsoever, but it's an interesting way I feel like there's going to be some Achilles heels inside the rope memory argument. If you guys happen to know a really good way to get into that, I've seen the videos with Arthur C. Clarke and a few of the NASA people back in the 60s creating this, even black and white movies of them stitching this rope memory together. I think there's more to it. But let me know. Let me know if there's an area that we're just simply not covering that needs to be covered, because I love the subject matter. And for those of you who always want me to do a new NASA video, I need you to understand that I sit around the house and whatever in my beach community here, and I angst a little bit because I also love the subject matter, but I am so against cannibalizing my own material from previous episodes just to satiate you guys, because I feel like that's a low quality product that I don't typically put in the show. And I just don't want to take it there, So anyway, I hope you dug the episode. For those of you who have not been to deepthoughtsradio.com, that's where we get everything. The video, the podcasts, the social media links. Again, we do have, quite frankly, the best group of Facebook people, I think, in any page on the internet. And it's funny. I make that claim a lot. And we've been getting some new subscribers, so hopefully you new folks are having a good time. I did have a person try to do that old saying of, I'm leaving your group because you have too many people that believe things I don't believe. And it's sort of that way of trying to make me change, what we talk about so this person feels comfortable. I apologize for you feeling uncomfortable, but what I have experienced as of the last month is that I've gotten some really close friends of mine that I've known for years to go up and join the page. And I'm now getting comments, routine text messages and face-to-face comments like, man, the people on your Facebook page, they're just really cool people. I really enjoy it. I learn more off your Facebook page than any other artery that I'm subscribed to. So just so you know, that's a super high quality place to be. I do a little bit of Twittering, and minds.com is my other favorite spot, which is sort of a sovereign free speech area that's very much like Facebook. I think it's a pretty beautiful site. I do Gab and Parler, but those two are just no fun right now. I mean, Parler is such a pain in the butt to log in. You have to do all this verification every single time you go to your account. And it's like, please, I don't need a jail cell in front of freedom of speech, right? So, like I said, the new season 1 is on a new channel. There's a couple ways to donate to the page. We have Patreon for those who know about that. I don't really engage in the tiering of it because I just want you all to be on the same level. What happens is if you do donate anything on Patreon ever, or even through PayPal with a handle, because you can do PayPal anonymously, or you can do it with your handle, you do get in the credits forever. Even if you have to pull out for several months or forever, you're still in the credits. I think you guys can realize those who are still active have a bigger font. If you do cross a $25 barrier, I'm going to put a special color on your name. So we do have one person contributing at $50, which is super awesome. But again, during these hard times, don't worry about it. If you spare a buck, what you typically get is the episode the second it drops. And when the season is typically rolling, you're going to get episodes a couple days before someone else, because I have 100 episodes I have to create within 1 year. I am still working on the season 6 intro. It's going to be probably a month away from August 1st here before that's going to release. So I'll keep you entertained in the meantime, at least one a week. But if I can think of the episode, I immediately create it. I don't hold back. Again, Tesla episode is coming to finish out this season here. So I'll probably get that done this coming week. I finally got through some critical patents. And so anyway, there's a store too, by the way. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.